Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review, going through a full album track by track, exploring each one in isolation and their part of the larger whole. Today we're going to be looking at the group Yellow Eyes, specifically their 7th album, Immersion Trench Reverie. I have no idea what kind of music we're in store for. I don't have a band logo or an artist logo to sort of get a feel for style, and the album art, well, it is kind of pretty. It looks almost woven, possibly, or cross-stitched, maybe. Something about the perforated holes within the design. But it also feels folk adjacent. Part of it is probably the color choice here, I don't know, burnt sienna on auburn kind of thing going on there. Oh wait, is that a logo in the top left corner? Oh shoot, maybe this is black metal. It's barely legible, but I can see the eyes in that. And there's lots of lines coming off of it. Not quite the tree branch thing, but... Alright, so we're probably dealing with some sort of folk metal here. Maybe blackened, maybe death. Enough with the hypotheses, let's dive straight into this. We have 45 minutes of music across 6 tracks. I think this video is going to be a bit on the shorter side, simply because we will have less analysis segments. But otherwise, I'm looking forward to this. Shorter runtime, shorter track length. I doubt that I'll feel overwhelmed by the end of it, which is something that happens, or can happen, on longer albums. Let's dive in, see what's going on with this opening track, Old Alpine Pang. That came in on a beat I wasn't expecting it. A very dry bass kick there. Just a thudding sound. No punch at all. The two guitar parts are similar, but out of phase. I thought that maybe they might have been a canon, but that finale tells me they probably wasn't. They probably weren't. what it is. Something about putting those eighth note bass kicks in that intro section just kind of it put a smile on my face. I was kind of chuckling about that a little bit. Oh shoot, this goes into the next track. All right, I wonder if the whole album is consistent then. I'll run that back a little bit as we head into the next track. That way we can get a little bit of that transition in there. The first thing that stands out to me is the production of this. I'd say it's mid-fi, kind of veering towards lo-fi, but there's something really important here. We don't hear this too often when we hit these lower fidelity production styles, is clarity. This is slightly muffled at times. It certainly isn't clinically pristine like, I don't know, the other end of the spectrum might be Haken's modern production. But it certainly isn't even a general high fidelity sound. It is muffled. It is crunchy on the sides. There is, I'd almost say, intentional audio destruction here. Instruments feel like they're kind of blown out, sort of like I don't know, like the old haloing that would appear on like really bad CRT TVs where you kind of lack that fine-tuned precision around shapes and objects and people on the TV. And it kind of feels like an audio version of that. There's just a general vague haze around most of everything here, which does allow it to blur together. There's also a lack of, I would say, strongly defined audio characteristics. For instance, I already brought up the bass kick. I think this is probably the best indicator of this type of production style, but it is kind of dry. It's almost too raw. It's muffled and muddied. It lacks any sort of punch. It's certainly a bassy sound, but it's just this low-end hit. It ends up working out, I think, generally, when we get to the 8th and 16th note bass kicks. It sounds fine. I think that the softer sound of it actually works well. One of my issues with blast beats and heavy repetitive rhythms, particularly on the drums, particularly in black metal, in the past has been these sounds being too dominant in the mix and being incredibly fatiguing to listen to in the rapidity and constantness that black metal drumming can be. And so when we get to those sections where we're just quickly alternating between snare and bass on 16th note patterns, it's not quite as fatiguing because these sounds aren't sharp. They're not punchy. They don't get through all of the noise. They're just kind of thuddy. They're soft. That ends up doing wonders for the listenability of this track. So there is a general mid to lo-fi element to all this, but like I mentioned earlier, I kind of spoiled where I wanted to take this. There's clarity. I can hear every hit of the drums, every part of the drum kit. I can hear both of the guitars clearly, not just that they're playing, but also what they're playing. As muffled and compressed as these guitars are, they're still the core, I don't know if I'd call it the core tone, but certainly the pitch itself shines through. I can hear these dyads incredibly well. It allowed me to engage with the track in a deeper emotional way than black metal sometimes can. Black metal has a barrier for me, whether that's a skill issue and that I just don't have, this is kind of ridiculous, I don't have enough time with the genre. I feel like it's my most listened to genre on this channel, or at least one of the top 3. But, maybe I just need more time with it, more familiarity with some of the harsher styles of black metal. Or if it's just a characteristic of some of the more low to mid-fi styles of black metal out there, it just creates a barrier. I can't really hear it I can get the general darkness of the song that they're going for, but I can't actually hear the individual harmonic movements within. On this, I can, and through that, it feels harmonically deeper and richer than most of black metal. That might not technically be true. Again, I sometimes have a tough time engaging with the chord progressions of black metal due to the production, but at least in this case, I have a pretty good appreciation for what's going on in here. It still chooses to explore the same 2 to 3 main ideas, and they're all in the darker, gloomier, melancholic heaviness. There's no levity or joy or reverence or even neutrality in here. Pretty much everything is fairly bleak, but it's flavors of bleak, shades of bleak, if you will. And I appreciate that nuance in here, and I think it's pretty cool that I got to engage with that, at least on this track, because given the way the drums felt at the beginning, I was kind of worried that this was going to be an album that I just didn't have a lot to say because I can't hear past the production, which has been a consistent theme for stuff that, well, kind of is in this category of black metal production styles. So I thought that was very cool, and it was one of the things that really stood out to me at first, is that they're towing this line very well. And I'm sure this is a difficult thing from an engineering side to create something that has this feeling while still creating clarity within that. Because if it were easier, I'm sure there'd be more bands doing it. I feel like it's the same way of trying to craft something high fidelity, where there is just a ton of space and clarity in all of the instruments. You can hear all parts of the timbre. You can really get into the nitty gritty of the tones of every single instrument, but it can oftentimes come off as too clean, not gritty enough. And so trying to make something like that actually have the bite of a less produced style of music, it's a difficult line to walk, to find that middle ground of clarity and character. And this is sort of they're sort of like opposite extremes, but still really difficult areas to work with. And it's so much easier to create stuff that is just incredibly high fidelity or incredibly low fidelity than trying to walk a thin line between these extremes and something more in the middle, and finding that line to walk rather than fall into either of or any of the pits that surround them. And I think that they do this phenomenally well. Now, this is black metal, though. When we look at this compositionally, especially on the guitars, it's all 16th notes from start to finish. We do have some sections that I feel cut to a halftime or at least a much slower tempo. If you feel this in the old tempo, it feels like we've shifted to eighth notes or even quarter notes at times. But if you assume that we just shifted the tempo, we've dropped the tempo a ton, we're still working with 16th notes. And so through that lens, the rhythmic element of this is kind of simple. That's not to say that the groove and the accent pattern are simple, though. Something that I picked up here is that there are small accents. I feel like there's a general consistency to picking, but there is a little bit of extra oomph on the first note of a new pitch. This might be true in more black metal. Again, production can obscure this information with certain bands. But also, when I think about black metal, yes, there is more melodic black metal. But even within that realm, I tend to think of changing on the downbeat. Maybe you'll hold this note, and when I say hold, instead of just strumming it and letting it ring, of course, we're going to keep picking it, but we're staying on this note. We're going to hold on to it for 2 beats, and then we'll change to the next one for 2 beats, and then we'll hold that one for 4, and then we'll do 2, 2, 2, 2, 4, whatever the pattern ends up being, but we kind of stick within this very rigid idea of downbeats, particularly either on beat 1 or 3, assuming we're working with a 4-beat bar. There is symmetricality to it all. There's not a lot of syncopation. I found some interesting syncopation here. First of all, the melody just seemed to move whenever it wanted to. It didn't feel locked into a grid of when it could change pitches. So we had changes on beats 1, 2, and 3. A lot of this track is just in 3/4. I believe I heard a section in 4/4, so there would be also changes on 4 there. But also between the beats as well, on the off beats. So the halfway point between beat 1 and 2, we would have a note change there too. I don't think we changed on any of the 16th subdivisions. So if we chopped up a beat into 4 equal lengths, where we could get a quarter into the beat or 3/4 into the beat, but we certainly had them on the beat and halfway to the next. And that allows us to have syncopation because we're going to be shifting when the change happens, not just on what beat, but also where in the beat. And this allows the melody to allows the melody to come across as more dynamic. And at least to me, that little bit completely changes my relationship to the track. It opens up a lot of possibility and makes it feel more engaging to me. It is still technically on a grid. You can chop up beats into as many subdivisions as you want and create a grid out of that. And so I suppose when I said earlier that it feels like changes are on a grid, that's not technically accurate as a bad thing, subjective as that is, for me at least. But it does feel like the grid is too wide. It takes too long to have a moment where it can feel like a change happens. Stuff like this works well. It can work well with atmosphere, with specific styles of music. Doom tends to change pitch rather slowly, especially once you get into funeral doom. It's just kind of a nature of that low tempo that they're working with. And I tend to be more forgiving of it there. But there's something about the quick picking, having so many attacks in a second, and pairing that with a slow moving melody, it just never quite works for me. It's a very subjective thing. I think it's one of the things of black metal that just never quite works for me. And it's why I tend to gravitate towards black metal that's less atmospheric and more melodic, not trying to hold on to ideas, but to move through melodies. And there's just a quicker pace to that, where it doesn't feel as locked in. Although, again, as usual, you can absolutely get away with some thematic and artistic ideas by slowing down your melody and locking into specific moments when it can change. It has a feeling of control to it. I feel like I've deviated a little bit away from talking about this specific track, though. The melodies in here I found to be engaging. And this is one of the reasons why, is the rhythmic devices. But also, it's the harmonic side of things as well. I had mentioned that I could actually engage with them. I found some depth. We really only have 2-note dyads. These guitars are playing 1 note each. A dyad is a chord made of 2 notes. It's the smallest chord you can have. And really, it's just the interval between these 2 notes that gives us our emotive feeling. Through this, I have found a lot of bleakness. There's not a lot of optimism in this track. Despair would be the opposite of optimism. There's melancholy. It is a dreary sound overall, but it's also oppressive. This doesn't really shine through the harmonic side, but is more of a production thing to me. It's the claustrophobic sound. It's the fuzziness of all the instruments, ensuring that there really isn't a lot of space in here for instruments. It feels just very cluttered. Everyone's stepping on each other's toes. There is a good use of spaciousness in the mix of the 2 guitars pushed to the opposite sides, but where they sit against the drums and the vocals, it bleeds into one another really easily. And so having all of these bleaker ideas presented not simultaneously, but consecutively, with this sort of oppressive atmosphere, absolutely tells me of a story or a feeling of being trapped somewhere, and you'd like to escape, probably. Most people don't like to sit in these sorts of, just stew in these kinds of emotions, but there's just no hope of leaving this. And honestly, I feel like I've described a lot of black metal here, even though I said I got more emotional information out of this. This is still just kind of a generic depressive black metal sound in general. But I think overall, there is more depth to it, and that stands out to me. I will say though, old Alpine Pain. I find this really interesting. We're gonna jump back to production real quick for a moment. I do need to talk about vocals real quick. But anyways, the production side of things, black metal, I've often described as feeling very, there's a coldness to it, like TV static. It's very black and white monochrome is the kind of vibe I get from a lot of black metal music. I don't get that here. I think a lot of that has to do with the fuzziness of it. It isn't static, it isn't crackly. I've already kind of, oh, this is actually pretty good. I have paralleled the sound of this to old tube TVs, and not the good ones either, like the cheap ones, where you're going to get that, what is it, the halogen aura around things, just a lack of precision. But there is also a warmth to that. And I think the analog, the parallel to audio might be tape. This is lacking digital precision. And so it's kind of lacking that characteristic that I associate so much with lower fidelity black metal of black and white static. This feels almost as if it's mimicking the warmth of the album cover. These colors absolutely shine through. And this is interesting too, because there are so many black metal covers that it's almost a cliche of, you know, snowy forest completely in black and white. You don't see color on a lot of black metal albums of a certain era anyways, and a certain stereotype too. There's always going to be other parts of this, other eras you can look at, specific bands who are doing stuff outside the norm. But when I think of a stereotypical black metal album, it isn't black and white, and the music tends to copy that. But the warmth of this, the earthier colors shines through in the production here. It's just very different for me. Because the opposite of this sort of staticky black metal would be some fourth wave stuff and more progressive avant-garde black metal, and black metal getting paired with other genres. And those tend to bring out more color, but they're less traditional. But this track, as far as I can see, compositionally at least, is a very traditional black metal track. It's not really being merged with punk or emo or death metal or doom metal or pop music. Black metal seems like it can really mix with anything. It's actually really impressive how much it bleeds into pretty much any other genre you'd like to pair it with. But this is very traditional. It's just presented in an untraditional way. It's like, I don't know, springtime black metal? Does that make sense? It's still bleak and depressive overall, but it feels like it has a warmer exterior. It doesn't feel like being trapped in a cabin during a blizzard like black metal tends to feel like for me. That has a very winter vibe to it. Yeah, I'm kind of intrigued to see where this album goes, assuming they're going to retain this production style, what kind of emotion they're going to feel through that. We might go on an emotive journey through this album, starting off somewhere bleaker, but I don't know, finding a way out of it, light at the end of the tunnel kind of deal by the end of the album. There are two instruments I haven't brought up at all. One is the vocals. They are tucked into the mix. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, somebody's got lyrics on this. I'm sure Metal Archive will, but black metal is one of those genres where it's kind of a coin flip whether the band has released their lyrics or not, especially when they tuck them into the mix like this. There is no way I would ever be able to transpose these by ear. I don't hear syllables in this track. I just hear sound. On the topic of sound, though, there are a few different styles. We have one that's a bit raspier, a little bit lower in pitch, that feels more traditional for black metal. It's still a, well, I'm gonna say it's a lower Fry scream. It's possible it's false chord and just much higher. But for me, I sort of associate Fries with black metal, and that's where this feels like. But we also have some higher pitched Fries in here that feel like they're borrowed from the depressive black metal genre. They come about less frequently, and I find them to be less shrill than depressive black metal screaming tends to be. Part of this is the warmth in the production, kind of uh, I don't know, reining in some of those more oppressive overtones. But generally speaking, I think it's just lower in pitch too than black metal shrieks or sorry, depressive black metal shrieking tends to be. And maybe that's it too. This feels like a scream and not a shriek, even though it is higher pitched. It is just generally more palatable to me. But there is that variety on here, and I appreciate that. Black metal vocals in particular can feel a bit monotonous, and there is a little bit of variety here that eases that. The other instrument I didn't bring up is the bass, and that's because I'm not entirely sure there's a bass in here. The bass kick takes up a lot of the low end. I did hear some lower, gnarlier tones. Not something I would hear from a bass guitar in black metal generally. And they tend to follow what the guitars were doing, so I was wondering if this was just the low-end presence of the electric guitars. I see this is a 2017 album, and that's going to influence some stuff, post-2010s guitar, even post-2006 guitar work kind of brought in a lot of low-end stuff, where kind of going into the 90s and prior, the guitars were more treble-focused. And so there's a possibility that the low end gnarliness on here is actually the electric guitars. But it might be the bass, in which case they're just kind of following what the guitars are doing. I don't know. The interesting thing is I don't really hear a lot of rhythmic enunciation going on. It's just sort of a gnarly rumble at the bottom of this song rather than hearing specific notes. That's another thing that kind of leads me into thinking maybe it is the bass guitar and not the electric guitars, because I can clearly hear each hit, each picking in the electric guitar. But if that isn't the bass guitar, I have no idea what the bass guitar sounds like, because I don't hear anything else at the low end. Honestly, the guitars and the drums take up so much of the sound sphere, the vocals are drowned out, and it's quite possible the bass is pretty drowned out as well. After track 3, I will look up some background information on this, personnel list. Doing that in the middle of the album feels like the right spot to do it. I'll see if there is a bassist, maybe a future track will have a clearly laid out bass sound. Maybe a moment of silence for the bass to play something as we transition into a new idea or something like that. But as of right now, I'm not convinced there is a bass on this album. So I really have nothing to add to the conversation regarding that instrument. Let's dive into some lyrics for Old Alpine Pang, and we'll proceed on. All right, we have no rhyme scheme at all on this. There's almost nothing that rhymes, but we do have a bunch of 4-line stanzas. It's not totally free poetry. But there is a small deviation at the end of the track where we have a 6-line stanza with some really long lines in it, at least compared to previous lines. So we have some rhythmic stuff that changes up in that final stanza. Now, Old Alpine Pang, a little bit of that southern came out there. That basically translates to I mean, it would be a pain of an old mountain or an old pain from the mountains, something along those lines. Or it could be a pain that's felt, a longing to return to the old mountains. None of those, I think, are really supported by my understanding of the lyrics, but I'm also not 100% sure what this track is about. I think some of it is just cultural. I don't know where this group is from, but none of this really resonates strongly with me personally, but I live in a very flat area, and while I have seen mountains, I've been around mountains, it's just generally not my day-to-day life. It says that there's a moan that drifts up from the lower world that's barely heard. The scent is of wet ice. Either a cattle farm, great mundane pleas from moonlit vats of mud, some stirring of the blood. I'm not sure about that first line, but the rest I find interesting. There's a great mundane plea. Great could be implying a size. It could be implying a ferocity of these pleas, but great also tends to or can mean grand. It could mean largeness in scope, but this is also mundane. It feels almost like an oxymoron to have these two words here as they almost oppose each other in ways. But it says that these pleas come from vats of mud, the old Alpine pang. So there's a moan that comes up from deep within the earth. And it is a plea, a mundane plea. It is the old Alpine pang. So the pains of an old mountainy area is what I get out of that. Is this just a track about the earth? The next stanza says maybe not. Broken leg song, lichen under nail, a life of skin. I'm not sure about the broken leg song. This could be a metaphor for a figurative leg of the earth, but lichen under nail. I mean, again, too, I guess suppose that could be figurative. Lichen that exists just beyond the outer layer. As we have a fingernail that this is sort of talking about having lichen under that, it could be that lichen hides beneath a first layer of the earth, a figurative nail of the planet. It says a blue so dark he will go blind. A moan drifts up bile on the breath of spring. Then we get to the final stanza, a silent Swiss funicular. I gotta look that word up. I meant to, and then I got into trying to figure out what all this meant, and I completely forgot to. On unlit rails, passes through dense wood smoothly, crosses the meadow and finds me through a gap between the molding and the pane. Pane, P-A-N-E, a flat layer of something. A funicular is a cable railway that ascends a mountain. I think it's interesting that, I mean, we could just call it a cable railway. What do we, cable cars? No, that's not right. What do we call those? Anyways, I didn't know they had a specific name for mountains traversal in particular. So this may be more of a metaphorical funicular here. It calls it silent. It is on unlit rails. It passes through the woods, crosses the meadow, and finds me. Is this the pang tracking this person down? So again, I ask, is this a feeling of pain of the earth, of the planet, or is this a longing to return to this environment from this person? Maybe it's both. Maybe it's neither. Y'all let me know what you think this track is about lyrically, because trying to pair this back to the music, I've got nothing. This is an incredibly bleak and melancholic track to me, and maybe that does line up with the longing interpretation, a want to be somewhere that you're not, and the mental strain that that puts on someone, feeling that they're trapped in a place they don't want to be in. but I wouldn't say overall the lyrics feel melancholic. This is an alluring track, one that calls out to someone. To me, I would expect a little bit more positivity in it. The feeling of being trapped is more implied than stated. But maybe it's that implication that I can feel because the music alludes to that. Maybe it is a cooperative message here where the lyrics say one thing and the music tells another. Let's head into this next track here. This one kind of comically titled Blue as Blue. And it's just, the spelling is the same. The color blue as the color blue. All right, I've rewound this a few seconds. We'll get the tail end of Old Alpine Pang, and then that will pull us into track 2. Yeah, see heavy dissonance here. You can feel the strain between what they want and where they are. Or at least that's how I would interpret that, knowing what the lyrics were just prior to this. The second track that's kind of kicking off temporally interesting. This is also the second track that kicks off with some sort of field recording. I completely forgot to bring that up. Working with triples, but working in a 4/4. Very rigid with that tempo increase. Speaking of rigid melodies, changing only on the beats. There was a slight classical leaning there for a moment, which was cool. I wonder how much of this is actual. Small moments. There's a bass. There's finally room to hear it. That drummer is taking up so much space. All right, I am beginning to get the impression this album's supposed to be heard in one go. Really cool stuff in that one. The first thing I noticed right from the start actually is so much more tension than usual. There was certainly elements of really unstable note intervals on the first track, but I felt like for whatever reason they were less frequent. This track really leaned into them, full sections devoted to tense harmony. This stands out to me though, not because it's dissonant. We've heard dissonant black metal before, but it's actually how the dissonance is applied. Because there was a section in here that felt very classical. I would say it was like 1 bar, maybe 2 bars tops, of just really classical movement between all three of these instruments. And I say three because I heard a lot of bass in this one. I'll be touching on the bass in a moment. But the movement felt like it pulled from Baroque era classical. And that's when something dawned on me. Baroque era classical does use much tenser harmony. Let me revoke that. Can use, and frequently did, but not exclusively used, more tenser harmony than we typically use in modern mainstream music. And I'm grouping everything into that, including the realms of mainstream metal. Harmony is incredibly solid these days. That doesn't mean it's always joyous. Pop music has its ballads. After all, we have sad pop tracks. But in those, you very rarely hear dissonant harmony. It's always consonant. The notes are designed to work well together. The intervals between all of the notes are balanced. The emotion that it pulls through might be melancholic, might be sad, might be joyous, might be happy, might be dancey, you know, whatever they're going for, but it's a stable chord that they're using. This is consistent in rock, hip hop, jazz, R&B, rock, metal, you name it. Jazz might be a little bit, jazz has some areas, but see, at that point, some jazz can get dissonant. So can some metal, so can some rock and pop once you start getting away from the mainstream. So yeah, I'm not going to go on that route. Everything has the ability to find more dissonant uses of harmony. But generally speaking, I would say that over time, our harmonic palette has eased up. I wanted to use the word simplified, and that might technically be correct, but I think it implies the wrong thing. Simply because a lot of the arguments about any music that came out after you found the music you enjoy, the argument is always music's too simple these days. Doesn't matter if you listen to music in the 20s and you're talking about the 50s, or the 50s and you're talking about the 80s, or the 80s and you're talking about the 2000s. It's always the argument. Music is too simple these days. So I don't want to say that it is simpler, even though on some level that probably is accurate. Regardless, again, I gotta stay on track, dude. My mind just strays today. I don't know what's going on. The chords here were more complex. Between these three notes, we had triads of parts of dissonance in here. The thing is that I think if you removed all of the compression, the overdrive, the distortion, all the stuff that gives us the cool metal sound, and you just played these notes on, you know, clean electric bass with clean electric guitars, no overdrive, you just played these notes, or better yet, put them on a different instrument. Put them on some violins, some violas, and some cello. All right? We'll put it that way. Nice little string trio. I think you would find that one, yes, this sounds very classical, but it also doesn't sound as gnarly. And I've mentioned this in the past. If you've been around the channel a while, you probably heard me say this, but when you amplify a guitar, you amplify the sound of it. Yes, you get the cool rock band stuff, you know, metal sounds, but you're also amplifying the qualities. And if the quality you're dealing with in your chord is tension, you're going to be amplifying that tension. It's one of the reasons the power chord was so prolific and still is fairly prolific in genres of music that use distorted instrumentation, because the power chord is the most stable interval that we have. We have a root and a fifth, and then the octave, which is technically just the root when we're talking about intervals. The root and the fifth is just incredibly stable. There's barely any dissonance to it at all. And so it creates something that you can amplify and distort as much as you can, and it doesn't really ever feel gnarly. So if you were to play some more complex harmonic stuff like classical can do on this level of distortion, you're going to be amplifying a lot of that negativity, a lot of that waviness, a lot of the clashing of the sound waves and what that feels like in our ears. It's a certain vibration to it all. And the more that I listened to this, I was trying to key in really closely to the note choices, particularly the triads created by these three instruments, the two guitars and the bass. And the more that I listened, I found there is a general classical leaning through most of this. Now, I do say leaning. I think if you put this on a string trio, it would sound fairly classical, but it does have a modern bend to a lot of it. It is sort of, it's not really playing classical music on electric guitars. It's sort of playing classical music by way of modern metal. And so it's more of a midpoint that I think is more like a 70-30 division, where most of it is metal, but there is a sprinkling of classical throughout. It gives it its general metal bite. It allows it to still have some of those more bluesier influences that metal has continued to carry through the years. But it is a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more diverse, and introduces a bit more of that tension and complex harmony that classical likes to use. And it sprinkles that in, and it works well with the bite, intensity, and general attitude that metal writing tends to have naturally. I think it is a nice addition and not overly used. This doesn't come across as classical metal or symphonic metal minus the strings or something like that. It is still very clearly blackened metal. It's just a, the note choice, the harmonic palette is just expanded out a little bit. We're not working with this massive set of chords to play around with. It's still more reduced as metal tends to use. It's just a little bigger than most bands will utilize. So I really enjoy that. That comes through rather nicely. And what I love about it is that it's nuanced. It isn't something I picked out immediately. It took a couple of cues to get my brain in that gear for me to start looking for that specific sound. And through that, I think that this is what makes this track these tracks so interesting to me harmonically. Is this dissonant black metal? Yeah, it certainly can be. There's still a lot of stuff in here that is black metal to me. It doesn't deviate as far from that formula as the first track did, which even then it wasn't a huge deviation. We just had some cool melodic ideas. But it's not super traditional either. There's something for me to chew on with these tracks. A lot of black metal, I hate to say this, I kind of dismiss it. I'm looking for something interesting that I can talk about, but especially when I get third wave black metal, it's all just kind of samey. I get a lot of tracks that just are all doing the same thing, and I don't have anything to add to them, especially at this point, 6 years into doing this and somehow being the black metal reactor on YouTube. There's just so little I have to say that came out of that era that is fresh, that I haven't said elsewhere from another band or another song. This track, a lot of it still sits within that conversation, but I'm finding new things to bring up, and I really appreciate that. The vocals here, though, these were shrill. I had mentioned in the last track that they were higher pitched screams, but hadn't quite reached that DSBM shrillness. I think we got that in a few places here. I'm not a big fan, but it's stuffed well enough into the mix that it's not too bad, and we got so few of the vocals that I think I can kind of omit it. The bass, though, yeah. I like what the bass is doing here. Now, granted, there's no technical wizardry going on here. I'm not going to gush about the really cool bass lines, but the bass is a key element in the harmonic palette here. Technically speaking, the bass is really doing what everyone else is doing. I think they're only hitting 8th notes rather than 16th notes, just due to the size of lower tones. They tend to work better when played less frequently, particularly with a size like this. If you wanted to play the bass faster, you would really want to hone the sound down into something thinner, something that would be more dexterous. I think this is when you listen to tech death bands, right? And jazz, particularly something like bebop, you listen to these bass tones and they're going to be really thin. There's going to be a lot of palm muting in there to reduce as much of the tail end as you can, because wider, bigger sound waves are just, they take up more space. They're harder to put a lot of overlapping one another. And so you really want to make it as small as you can so you can put more in there. This bass tone is massive. I've already described it as gnarly. It just takes up a lot of space. And unless you're muting all of them, you're going to have all these sound waves just layering on top of one another, and it'll feel muddy. There's just going to be a lack of clarity to it all. So having the bassist pick these notes less often is just the right decision to make when you want this specific sound. With that said, though, there's not as much rhythmic alteration in this track. I was talking about the wider grid idea that kind of bores me in other black metal tracks where I can say, oh, we're only ever going to change the note every couple of beats or so. We get that here. I pointed that out. We only changed on the beat, and a little bit after that, we were changing every other beat. There is no syncopation to this. There is no changing between beats. For most of this track, it is fairly rigid of where the pitch will change. This track, though, isn't about melodic dexterity. It's about harmonic dexterity. We have 3 instruments all playing their own melodies. And they're all changing pitches at different times, creating these ever moving, ever shifting chords. It's not like this is the chord for this bar, and then we're going to do a chord for this bar. It's that this is the triad for this beat. We go to the next beat and one guitar has shifted their note. We go to the next beat and a bassist has shifted theirs and the second guitar shifted theirs. We have a different triad here. We go to the next beat. The bass changed, no one else did. This is a different triad. And it is constantly in flux. This is gorgeous. Now, I will say I wish there was more clarity to this. I mentioned last track that this does have clarity to it in a production that typically doesn't, and that is still true here. But there is still a level of fuzz that obscures some of the information of these instruments. When I say that I want more clarity, I would love to hear these notes without the production layer. Maybe transposed and arranged for a string trio, as I mentioned, but even just taking, I don't know, MIDI representations of these and just listening to the pitches with even like just MIDI synthesizers. I'm not caring too much about the tones of the instruments. I just want to hear how these notes interact with each other. Even playing all of these on a piano, which might be a bit more difficult given the consistent shifting nature of it all, I think would sound really great and would give me a stronger appreciation for it. But even what I am picking up through the obfuscation is really great and emotionally evocative. And being able to hear the bass as clearly in this, particularly because I feel like the guitars are, they're either pushed out a little bit to carve more space for the center bass, or they're just smaller. They're not taking up as much size. It could also be that I'm acclimating to the production of this now. Any of these could be possible. Regardless, I feel like I can really hear the bass here. Oh, another thing, maybe the bass just isn't playing what the guitars are, which was my hypothesis for track 1. That they were overshadowed by the bass because they were just playing the same, overshadowed by the guitars because they were playing a similar idea. That's not true here. They are a complete distinct third part to this track. And I really love that. I hope they continue on with that, but move with the rhythmic dexterity of track 1, and we see a combination of all of this sometime on this track. Of course, I wouldn't expect them all to be like this. Every track, I'm sure, is going to have its own thematic idea, and you're going to want to write the music that best tells that story. But I do hope that we kind of get that combination somewhere on this album. As for emotion, I feel like a lot of this is lining up well with track 1. It's depressed. I don't think I used that word necessarily the first time around, but it feels heavier in that melancholic regard. But it is tenser too. There's an anxiety in this track that was alluded to on track 1, but in full focus here. With a track called Blue as Blue, I'm already in a melancholic mood. I feel that this person is in the blues. So I'm expecting the lyrics to be maybe darker than the first, but also I'm not sure there was a lot of synergy on the first, and maybe that's not what they're going for on this album at all. With that said, let's dive into track 2's lyrics and see what they're singing about. It's interesting that the last track mentioned a mundane plea, I believe was the phrase, a great mundane plea. This track seems to be focusing on mundanity. Talks about a trim around the cedar door that is blue as oil paint. Just talking about blue in like totality. No other pigments in here at all. I assumed this was blue as blue, talking about how someone is depressed and melancholic as they have the blues, as blue as the color blue can be. But it's not really. Talks about how he's exalted and even keening as if a royal bird, that nobody should see him anymore. He's left society out here in a cabin with the blue trim around the cedar door, joyous to finally be alone. Says there's a dark flash of an airplane against the sun and crickets pulling a midday thread behind his ears. It makes everything bright. The solitude, the distance from him to civilization. No planes overhead even. They are so far in the distance that they're just a speck against the sun. Visible, but not even audible. All he hears are crickets. And that makes him happy. It says a crop balloons and splits untouched. Red tubes and seeds, black paper, blue as oil paint, as damsel flies below the cedar floor. So we have crops coming in, farming. Don't get any more mundane than farming. But it also seems to imply that the farming isn't just something that's done, but a foreshadowing of something blossoming, growing beneath the cedar floor. I doubt you would farm where the sun can't get to, so it's probably not his crops there underneath his house. Maybe this is a concept album. The tracks are running together, so kind of checks out there. But also we had somebody who seems to be longing for solitary life, distant from maybe not society. They do seem to take some joy in being alone, but maybe it's just getting away from the noise of it all, from the big city, and getting back to the roots of nature. And then we have a person at a cabin alone and joyous to be here, reconnecting with these roots, if you will. Yeah, that's starting to come together. Assuming the next 4 sets of lyrics tie into all of this, I'd say that generally speaking, this is probably what they're aiming for, is a single story about this person over 45 minutes. Let's dive into the next track, Shrillness in the Heated Grass. I knew, dude. He had about a 60 BPM, 65 BPM thing, but I knew the bass kicks were going to bump it up. But also we've increased 5 to 7 BPM here too. There was a bump up in speed alongside the additional drum work. that feeling of maybe longing has been replaced with this unease. The choir again? If I am correct in how I'm understanding the overarching narrative here, I'm missing one thing. I concluded that this was more of a modern take on things. I want to get away from a city and return to the peaceful roots of living within nature. But both track 2 and 3 have ended with this choir, and pretty much every track has begun or transitioned into the next track with some sort of village-like ambience. Here we can hear it incredibly clearly. There's bells ringing, there's people coughing, all presumably happening while this choir performance is being done. It feels very small. And maybe comparatively, this feels large to our narrator and is what they're trying to escape from. But the songs continue to return to it. If our focus is them off in the forest doing their own thing, why do we keep shifting back to this little village? There is a larger narrative at play, I think, beyond the lyrics and the mood setting of the music that I am not understanding yet. Which, being halfway through and not understanding something that seems integral to it is not a great place to be. By this point, I'd like to understand what's going on so I can follow into the back half of this album, seeing how it embellishes on these ideas, themes, or narrative beats. But that's just not where I'm at yet. Maybe it'll make sense by the end. Maybe I'll need some help understanding the purpose of these transition elements. And again, it's not just transition. The opening of the track started off with ambience as well. It is beautiful, though, the choir parts. I was a little upset that the bells were out of time with the chorus. It makes them feel incredibly separate, which gives it the noisiness of a little town center. It sells the idea that this is, I don't know, a busy forum, a market, possibly. Some place for performances to happen, but they're not the only thing happening. It's not like being in an auditorium and trying to restrain any noise for the performance. But I was a little upset. It was just jarring to hear all of this happening out of time with one another. The coughing being out of time makes sense, and I think that's what helped put the bells in perspective. But prior to that, it was just the bells in a different tempo than the singing, and I was just wondering why. Why would you do this? It's just aggravating. But I'm somebody who, if there's music going on, I'm walking in beat with it subconsciously. If I need to sneeze, I will sneeze on beat subconsciously. I don't aim to do these things. My body is just rhythmically in tune with the things around me. If I were in charge of ringing bells while this performance was going on, you bet it would be in time with these vocalists. Whether I'm meant for it to happen or not, locking into rhythm is just, it's a natural order to things. um, Going to the metallic side of this dude is screaming so shrill. It's in the title, Shrillness in Heated Grass. I doubt it's describing the vocals, but yeah, it's a good description of the vocals. I had mentioned on the first track that there was some nice variety on the vocals, both in perceived pitch and in timbre. All that's been kind of thrown out. Maybe I'm misremembering it. Track 1, I recall having more variety. I remember talking about the variety. Tracks 2 and 3, though, it's just DSBM, shrill, high-pitched vocals all the time. They're still a bit in the mix, but they seem to be less in the mix than I remember. They're just more dominant. Maybe it's because I don't like this sound, and so it's easier for me to focus on it, which seems counterintuitive, but it's the way my brain works, man. You hear something that you don't like, and it just dominates everything. And you can't unfocus from it, and then it just annoys you. Like trying to block out the most annoying sound, the creaking of a chair. It's fine until you notice it. And then it's all you can think about, and until you just boil up and, you know, erupt. Dude, stop squeaking the chair, just sit still in it. That's the vocals to me at this point. Stop screaming, dude. Just whisper it, sing it to me. I don't care, dude. Spoken word, go for it. Stop screaming at me. I think this is one of my biggest hurdles with DSBM style vocals. Interestingly, they are kind of running a parallel to some of the higher pitched fry screams in post-hardcore and even screamo. And there's times where it's kind of not so bad. In fact, I think one of the first times we listened to some DSBM, which I think was Silencer. And we're talking like 4 or 5 years ago, so I might be wrong. Silencer is definitely one of the first ones I was introduced to. I vaguely remember making this parallel because as many people in the comments were like, that's not my cup of tea. I was like, you know, I get it. It's not great, but it's not, I don't really have this total aversion to it. It's not something I would want to listen to a lot of, but within this context of like an 8-minute song, it was fine. I have found my limit for this though. Nobody send me DSBM albums. That's just going to be terrible. Now that I've said it, I'm sure people are queuing it up, but yeah, this is definitely starting to, might be a little hyperbolic to say it's getting on my nerves. Generally speaking, there's not a lot of lyrics on these tracks. Even looking at this track, we're looking at 4 stanzas. So 4 stanzas out of 8 minutes. There's not a lot of them, but when they are present, it's definitely something I'm wishing there was another approach to. Again, very subjective though. Doesn't make it worse off, doesn't make it better. It's just not a sound I particularly am keen on. Not in this large of a dose, anyways. Musically, and this kind of lines up with some of the vocal work there, this is filthy. I wanted that word to linger a little bit. Filthy. Because this track reminds me of Downward Spiral, 9 Inch Nails, in just how slimy and disgusting they can make an atmosphere sound. Part of it is production. The warmth of this feels like a great place for molds and slimes to incubate in. But the other side is obviously the harmonic work. And this is incredibly dark and uneasy in a way that isn't ominous. It's not sad. It's not angsty. It is unease. It's a flavor of anxiety that isn't just feeling overwhelmed or stressed, but an active knowledge that that stress comes from an environment that is actively hostile to you. I am stressed out because I am on full alert, not for any one specific thing I'm looking for, but that anything could choose to attack me. The atmosphere itself is hostile to me. It put a gross taste in my mouth, and I was not too keen on this section, but that in and of itself is spectacular. I did not like it, but I had such a visceral reaction to that first time we went into the chorus. I'm going to assume it was the second style within here, and we returned to it after we revisited the first style. So I'm going to assume it was verse, chorus, something here, maybe a bridge or a post-chorus, and then a verse and this chorus again. The second time around, I was expecting it. Still not great, but at least it didn't catch me off guard. That first time through was vile, though. And hats off to them, their engineer, their composer. Don't want to return there at all, but they nailed that vibe so well. Otherwise, this track seemed a bit standard. I haven't really caught too much of a structure on most of these songs, but it did find this verse chorus thing on this one. It was one of, oh yeah, dude. Interestingly, while we got one of the most disgusting sections on this track, we got some of the most jubilant sections, albeit short-lived. These were not around for a while, but some sort of, well, to reuse a phrase from this video, light at the end of the tunnel. There was some element of joy present in this track in two specific places. Two different flavors of positivity too, mind you. We didn't spend enough time with them for me to get a good feel for them, but they certainly weren't identical. One did feel like a longing for more, though, not in a sense of pain, but something obtainable. But that was short-lived. The other one was just, again, a general positive vibe. I didn't get a good read on it. But we haven't really heard anything like that this album. So that stands out quite a bit. And it almost feels self-correcting. The song moves into some depths that the album has never heard, and so we swing back to the opposite extreme, finding some more tones that this album hasn't played with, but in the opposite direction. Now granted, I don't think they're balanced out. We spend way more time in this dark, grimy area down here, but it is interesting that both of these extremes show up in the same track. I had mentioned that I would read into some of the context surrounding this album. Some of it, I suppose, informs a bit of it, but the rest doesn't, at least not from my perspective. The part that really clicks with me is that this was recorded to tape in a cabin. Yeah, that checks out. I couldn't quite place the pin on what was informing the vibes in this. I assumed it was digital and that someone on the engineering team just created a lot of warmth out of that, but it was recorded to tape. Yeah, this sounds like it was recorded on tape. The other part, though, is that two of the brothers, Will and Sam Skarstad, spent part of their winter in Siberia. And while this was recorded in the following spring, they still used some of that experience of what is described as the harsh winter to write the music of this album. It is described by one of the people at Genius as the most complex and pummeling album that they have created thus far, framed with the sounds of Siberia in the winter, flat bells, wild dogs, and the close harmony singing of a town's women's choir. I can kind of see some of that. It is interesting, though, that this person feels a very strong winter element to this, while I don't. I described this as a springtime black metal album previously, which does match when it was recorded, but doesn't match the inspiration for the composition. I find all of that to be interesting, but also the choir. That seems to be field recordings of an actual choir in a local town that they then put into this. And that certainly gives it that small town vibe. That's where it was recorded after all. It doesn't give me any insight into what the album is, the narrative of it, but it does provide some really cool context that surrounds all of it. On the on the lyrics of this track, I'm kind of lost for the first time. There is a general negative scope here. We're looking at something that is melancholic, a heavy weight hanging over the day. It describes that the day's lung is held full. This line is mentioned twice, that the day itself does not breathe. For fear, for grief, I don't know. It says, collapsing on his hunting stool, seed shells like a radiance. I don't understand that phrase. Is seed being used as a verb here? To seed shells. But even if so, how do you do that like a radiance? Radiance is typically an adjective, is to describe, oh no, that's radiant. It still sounds weird. The syntax of it feels wrong in my mind. I get a general vibe of it, but also pairing this, or the radiant process of seeding shells, it's used against collapsing on a stool. The stool is a hunting stool, which pulls into mind what kind of shells are we dealing with. We have seen seeds growing, the entire farming element that has been present on Blue is Blue. We can view a seed as a shell of sorts, something that will be cracked and open for the flower to begin to bloom. To grow first and then bloom. But also with a hunting stool, we could be talking about shotgun shells. And if he's seeding these shells, would that mean that they were inside of him to begin with? Is this somebody who collapsed on a stool because they've been shot? I don't know. The rest of this doesn't really answer that question. It mentions an oligarch flanking his tent, salted thistle in his throat. I don't know. To the family, keep the mansion dark and full of leaves for this nest against the tent. So he's telling his family that I didn't know he had to appear that you don't live in a place anymore. To keep the mansion dark and full of leaves, dilapidated, overgrown, empty, or at least the appearance of because they would be hunted? It says there was a ghost that lined up the physics of the carpet pane, the coldest depth among the stream, the darkest blue above the ridge. This does feel a bit bleak. The coldest depth, the darkest blue, a carpet of pain where ghosts lined up. Death rings out in every description here. Was our narrator hunted by an oligarch? And if so, why? Everything seemed to be pretty fine up until this point. I never quite got the dissonance between the depression of the music and the general serenity of this going off on your own into the forest and enjoying that. That's been going on in the lyrics. This is one part where I feel like things start to click. This is one of the gnarliest tracks on the album, and it is about someone dying in their final moments. Yeah, that's pretty gnarly. But if this is a concept album, how does all of that fit together? Hopefully they'll answer that as we push forward into Velvet on the horns. And I mentioned that the last track was pretty filthy. This might take the cake. So we've kind of gone into a double time on the original 3, but now it's easier to count out the 4. But really, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's double time of the original. Assuming that's a transition, we're going to stop there. Right from the start, this was worse than the last track. I find it interesting that I did bring up the Downward Spiral previously, as that is an album that got worse over time too. Maybe not linearly, but it did get generally progressively gnarlier, heavier, and more difficult to listen to. Blue is Blue introduced some ideas that I found were a bit sharper. Shrillness and the Heated Ones went really harsh, and track 4, Velvet on the Horns, I think is somehow gnarlier than the last. It would not surprise me if tracks 5 and 6 continued on with this. Much of what I praised in track 1 that made it slightly more palatable has practically been erased by this point. It is, in some ways, a much more traditional black metal than we kicked the album off with. But there are still concepts in here that I think allude to a really strong harmonic understanding by the composer. Maybe there's two. I don't know who writes what. At least I know there's more than one person in the group now. Regardless, I appreciate what it's going for and the evolution of sound throughout. In some ways, more impressive as we get through it, and in other ways, well, still impressive, I suppose, but less palatable to me. I don't know why I chose to use impressive to kick that off. It starts off more palatable and has moved progressively into less palatable sounds. But it's all done presumably for a reason. Maybe by the time we end this album, I'll understand why we've been spiraling downward as quickly and aggressively as we have. Now, this track continues on with this idea of expanded aggression, something I didn't touch on in track 3 because I didn't feel it was as interesting. It was something that appeared, but I hadn't quite connected the dots yet. But here it feels incredibly purposeful. Tempo plays a really strong role in this album. I had mentioned early on, maybe track 2, a playfulness of tempo. A couple of BPMs here and there, double time, just stuff to make things feel a little faster, a little slower, or wildly faster, wildly slower. What I've noticed in parts of track 3 and on full display here in track 4 is almost an unreliability of tempo. There are times when it feels like we're only in a specific speed for 4 bars before we're shifted, thrust into another, slightly faster, slightly slower. There's larger jumps. We push from a moderate speed into a pretty brisk pace and then back. And then, of course, we have the massive double time jump at the beginning of this track that I found rather interesting. Starting with a standard 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, a nice brisk pace. I don't know if that's the exact tempo, but it was something very followable. And then double timing into something that I could barely even conduct without looking like I'm just flailing my arms around wildly. At that quicker speed, it was easier to understand each group of 3 as a beat. So you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you get 4 groups of that, which counts out to be like a 4-4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's more easy to digest. The tempo doesn't really change too much from the old one if you follow that, but everything in the song is working within this much quicker triplet feel of putting 3 beats or 3 hits per beat, 3 notes per beat. And it feels wild, uncontrollable. We had both a double time and a no temporal change simultaneously, something that felt like it got quite a bit faster, but depending on your perspective, hasn't changed speed at all. All of these ideas are rapidly tossed into the mix. Again, sometimes it feels like we can't go 4 bars or more than 4 bars with a consistent tempo in this track. Whether it's a small adjustment of just 5 BPM or wild swings like double and halftime, it is all over the place. The concept of a downward spiral, of a continuous descent, kind of implies a cone-like idea where the rings are the widest at the top, but as you get to the bottom, you're spinning even faster. Modulation of time feel, at least. You're still descending, but it feels like you're going faster because, well, your rotations are more frequent. That sort of chaos and uncontrollability, while maybe a bit more defined in a cone-like downward shape, is represented rather well in the inability to predict how the song will evolve. There's no lead-ups, there's no accelerandos, there's nothing that implies we're going to change tempo, it just does, and you're left trying to catch up to the song. It is in so much of this track and makes it feel like you are being thrown around in a tornado, doing your best to hang on to any sort of sense of up and down, much less trying to hold on to something that will keep you in place. You're at the whims of this disaster. And so much of this song feels like that to me. Lyrically, this song continues in the direction that we have kind of been seeing. The first 2 tracks were very plainly stated for the most part. A couple of lines and phrases might have eluded me, but the general idea was straightforward. If there was a figurative read, a secondary layer to either of those tracks, it eluded me. The third track, though, yeah, I still don't have a strong grasp on it. The fourth one is wildly more metaphorically dense. Somehow it reaches another level past the third of obstruction. The meaning hidden beyond my grasp. It says overnight, or was it not? Green ragged cloth had fallen on the path. The way I took had velvet on the horns. So we don't have a good time frame here. Our narrator is unreliable in that fact at the very least, but even in their descriptions they seem to make little sense. A green ragged cloth falling on a path. Yeah, literally I understand that, but what does it mean? What does it represent? Instead of telling us, it says that the way I took had velvet on the horns. I looked this up. This seems to be a very specific phrase. I wondered if it was an idiom of some sort, where the meaning had been kind of lost to time, something that made sense in a specific era and culture, but kind of doesn't make sense anymore. You'd have to know the history of these words to understand why the phrase means what it does. Velvet on the horns is not an idiom, though, at least not one I can find. Not even on the horns, where I could interpret that the velvet might mean something describing the idiom itself. So I'm left with a phrase that I have to decipher on my own. What does it mean to have velvet on the horns? And I don't know. We're talking about traveling. Maybe you're riding a horned beast. Maybe. That seems a bit far-fetched. As far as animals go that we ride, horses are the first one that come to mind. I don't know too many people who ride cows around. But you know, let's roll with it. To have velvet on the horns, at least in modern day, I would perceive velvet as a type of luxury. So on one path, there's a ragged green cloth, could indicate hardship, could indicate distress. It is a ragged cloth after all, but it's also not part of the cloak or shirt that it originally was attached to. We took a different way, one that was easier, one that was more luxurious. I wish I could say I have a strong read on this based on where we go, but I don't. My inquiry ends here, because nothing else seems to tie back to this at all. It says, I peered straight through and saw the shrinking frame collapse and bloom and choke on its vast ornate teeth. I would cry out if it were not so late. What is a frame that is shrinking? Collapse works within that, but blooming is sort of the opposite. And it chokes on vast ornate teeth. It obviously is horrific of some sort to our narrator. It says that they would cry out, but it's too late for that. I wonder if that means that the time has passed, or that it is literally too late at night and he does not wish to awaken people sleeping. Regardless, he sees this horror and says nothing about it, only remarking that I do not remember you, this perfect sphere and this chlorine smell. It's a painting that was damaged in the hold. At this point, this is becoming a bit surreal in my eyes. We already have seemingly opposite descriptions of things, but also inhuman, non-natural descriptions, followed with these vague descriptions of spheres and chlorine. And then out of nowhere, imagine that a propane tank, when squarely struck, becomes a bell, yet huddles by the driveway in the cold. I think this is the first line that mentions anything a bit more modern. Driveways and propane tanks are certainly of the modern era. But what does this mean? Yes, when you hit a propane tank, it rings out. It does technically become a bell, but what does it mean that the tank huddles by the driveway in the cold? That also feels purposeful, given that propane tanks are used to create flames. Instead of, I don't know. And this leads me back to the opening. What is a path taken with velvet on the horns? It is the title of the track. It seems like it's fairly important. I don't know. And then to wrap this up, we have the rustling of grass underfoot. Now, there's still 15 seconds or so left in this track before we head into the shortest one on the album, Immersion Trench Reverie, the title track. I doubt I'm going to get any answers in those few moments, though. Let's push forward, see where we go with the penultimate track on this album. So a pedal tone over here for these varying levels of dissonance to contrast against. another harsh tempo shift. Yeah. All right. Wow. All right. Couldn't even speak after that one. Not much to add to this one. I was tempted to roll it over into the next track, but one thing really stood out to me that I want to give some praise, and I figure it's probably good to read the lyrics of the penultimate track before we move into the finale. So, this one thing I want to bring up is the one instrument I haven't really had too much time to praise at all. Part of it is that there's just a lot of talk on the harmonic side that there's not really a lot of room to bring up anything else because it is, as far as I'm concerned, the primary drive of this album. Harmony is everything. It is atmosphere, it is energy, it is direction, it is momentum. Everything else is subservient to that or secondary. I feel like the vocal work is secondary while the drum work is subservient to that. It helps embellish what the harmony is already doing. And that's technically still true in this track also, but the drummer gets to shine a bit more than usual. With only 16 minutes left in the album, they finally let loose. And boy, was it fun. We got some punky ideas in there. We got some rock ideas. We got some driven, like hard rock, lighter metal stuff. And we got tons and tons of blast beats. All of it worked together and intertwined with ridiculous displays of speed and intensity in these drum fills. There was a solid 2.5 minute run of just the drummer showing off both technical skill and encyclopedic knowledge of drum patterns. I found this to be quite enjoyable. I love drumming in general. I love technical drumming. And this dude constantly changing up time feels, throwing in polyrhythm. We had a hemiola 3/2 polyrhythm in there a couple of times. Something super punky, which put a big smile on my face. Longtime viewers, y'all know, for whatever reason, I love it when black metal gets a punk drum beat behind it. I don't know what it is about it. It just works. It brightens my day. I think it's because they're just so distinct. Like black metal guitar work, atmospherically and melodically, is generally fairly dreary. There is more optimistic black metal out there, but I think on the whole, if I had to have a gut feeling, no data to back this up, but probably a good 65 to 70% of the black metal I've been exposed to is overwhelmingly negative in emotion. And to pair that with punk, which, yes, usually is angsty or angry even, that's fairly negative, but there's an energy to it that feels less aggressive and more dancey. I can go about skanking in a punk rock pit, but skanking at a black metal show is, I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. I'd be surprised if we could even get a circle pit going at a black metal show. It feels more mosh ready than some of the fun dancing stuff you can do at a punk show. And there's just two very different vibes. And to sort of smash them together almost feels unorthodox to me, but always works. I don't know, the energy of punk drumming with the ferocity and emotional heaviness of black metal guitar work is just a really cool combo, and I love when it happens. It probably also helps that I'm more of a punk person than a rock or metal kid, so yeah, it's probably nice just to get a little bit of what I'm used to in what I'm not. A little bit of a bridging of styles. Drum praise aside, this is more on the spiral. And right off the bat, I had mentioned that there's a high pitch pedal tone that this I think it was descending series of pitches become increasingly dissonant with this one tone, and they start off dissonant. So we have a pedal tone to measure dissonance by. That's never well, I'm not gonna say never. It's usually not an indicator of positive thematic ideas. We're looking at both descending and antagonistic concepts simultaneously. So there's clashing at story here. There's a downward movement. This entire track continues to work within even more, although less grimy atmospheres, but still dreary, melancholic, grief-stricken chord progressions throughout. The guitar tones haven't shifted much. The vocals are as shrill as ever. It's, in a lot of ways, more of what we've been listening to. Track 1, I might go back and listen to again and see what's going on there, because I tell you, in my memory, it is a bit distant from everything else we listened to. And I wonder how much of that was that the album was fresh at that moment and I hadn't seen patterns on the larger scale yet. 2 through 5 feel like they're all cut from the same cloth. 1, in my memory, is just a very different song. I mean, is it black metal? Is there heaviness and darkness to it? Yeah, I described all of that, but there's just more variety, more playfulness, rhythmic juxtaposition, and it wasn't chaotic. But assuming that that is the original sound that all of these worse and worse levels are contrasted against, that makes sense too, to create an emotional anchor at the beginning of the album for the rest to be compared against. That's probably why they did that then. Let's hit some lyrics. I had mentioned how some of the lyrics had become more surreal on the previous track, and I find that to be elevated on this one. It's kind of beautiful, which is not what I would describe most of these lyrics. I would say that there's a functional element to a lot of the vocabulary. It says what it needs to say in the least amount of words that it needs to say it. But here it feels like the mere 16 lines we get say so much more than just what's trapped within these few lines. There's depth here that I haven't found elsewhere. And that gives it, well, I think it's the depth paired with my inability to glean the meaning from it that gives it its surreal vibe. It begins and says, "Forgot the dream that led me to the cane." I love this line. I don't think my interpretation of it is 100% their intent, because this is reused later and the cane itself is revisited in a different section that I don't think necessarily works well with my interpretation, but I still think that within a vacuum, this is a cool line. The dream that leads to the cane. If the cane is symbolic of old age, needing a stick to help support the body, they don't remember the dream that got them here. Most people don't dream of old age, but you do dream of doing something larger with your life. Sometimes that requires pushing of the body, wearing it down a bit quicker than if you hadn't striven? If you hadn't have strived to do something grand. And through that process of chasing and achieving your dream, well, maybe not achieving, but at least chasing your dreams, you have worn your body down more, causing you to wind up with the cane. There is a straightforward connection here that is typically not always noticed when the dream is originally conceived. It is an unintended side effect. The dream itself did lead to here, but it was not an original end goal. It's not something one typically assumes chasing the dream will take them to. I don't know, I love that line. It says, "But how the rattle tempts me, wide and scraping. Sit and dry, make mica on your skin." I had to look this one up. Mica is a type of mineral that has outstanding physical characteristic. I didn't read much more beyond that, but it seems to be used for a lot of things. It's common in igneous and metamorphic rock, and can be found in sedimentary rocks. Apparently, it's quite malleable and strong. So we have to make something malleable and strong on our skin. This almost feels like creating a barrier, maybe even armor, which we will see bronze plate show up in a couple of stanzas. It then says to divide your forearm like a stack of yellow news. News. Not sure about that. Muscovite sheath. Thick billfold fray, new glinting slots the sun can breach. I had to look up muscovite. I did not know what that is, and wouldn't you know it, it's also known as common mica. It's a mineral of aluminum and potassium, a specific combination of the two. So a muscovite sheath, once again, to put something valuable within something else, covering the skin with mica. It then says that the cane flares open just before a hill, and I see the bronze plate water gleaming, flawed like pollen, settled, and was cast a spectrum frozen flat upon the gleam. But now the gold has turned to black, and frogs pierce the ear. I am the cane, and I forgot the dream that led me here. Yeah, definitely more surreal than the straightforward lines of the opening track. There is definitely an end goal here, maybe not one that was originally understood, but one that has been accepted. Also, the frogs piercing the ear. We're back to nature, frog sound being heard everywhere. Almost as if the return to nature in its entirety and its in the conceptual element of it was a calling for an old man to return to something that feels more simple at the end of their life. Maybe. I don't know. Again, it's all a bit surreal and resistant to my attempts to understand it. With that said, let's wrap this up. Longest track on the album, nearly 11 minutes. Jubilat. Got some insect chirping, bird song maybe.
There's that really quick 3. I'm also having a difficult time understanding the pacing and phrasing of this. Like, I'll find a chord like this, but it just won't be consistent, and of course here it is. So a bit of release rhythmically here after all of that tension. But harmonically, we're still sort of in that same realm. Yeah, I was kind of hoping for a positive turn by the end of this, but I mean, there is some beauty in the bells. Well, maybe not anymore. I think with the introduction of these lower bells, it almost feels like an elegy, a song for the dead. Not to say there's not beauty in it, but it isn't quite as positive as I originally read it to be. Do I have anything to add on to for this final track? I don't think so. It is, much like most of the tracks we've been listening to, an exaggerated version of what came before it. I do think that as far as the gnarly sounds go, harmonically, this is taken a step down. It's not quite as filthy or dissonant as tracks 3 or 4, but it is more intense than any of the tracks so far. The sheer ferocity and speed of a big chunk of the middle of this track make it feel incredibly intense in a way that we haven't seen too often. We have had wild drumming, fast guitar work, blast beats in a few tracks. I'm not going to say that that's exclusively presented here in the way that it's wrapped up, but it is, I think, held out for a much longer time than we have seen prior. And this feels like we're driving towards an end. And of course, when we lose that, it is a quick shift to a more calm, atmospheric sound. Harmonically, it's still pretty dark, but it feels like a massive weight gets pulled off of our shoulders. We listen to this for a minute and then we go to the bells. There is this rapid decline at the end of this track. And I've already mentioned how the bells feel elegiac to me. They start off a little positive, but once we bring in the lower tones, it quickly begins to feel sad alongside this. And that mix of sadness and celebration isn't the right word, because I think people tend to relate it to parties. But I do think it has that feeling of celebrating a life, remembering the good, and pairing that with the grief of having lost them. And that is typically what elegies and elegiac music tend to feel like to me. It is both a mourning and a celebration. And so I wonder then if the end of this track isn't. There was one more thing I wanted to bring up here, though. Oh, yeah, that aspect. I had mentioned, I think it was track three's rapid fire tempo shifting that felt like being in a whirlwind. This gave me a similar feeling, though not from the tempo. Though we did have tempo shifts throughout, seems to be a recurring theme in their composition style. What we did have, though, was really wild phrasings that seemed to constantly be in flux. I very rarely understood where beat one was in here. Well, that's kind of wrong. I could usually find beat one, but anticipating when we would return back to the first beat of a phrase, pretty much impossible for me. Sometimes, as I pointed out, when I started conducting this, hey, all this stuff is kind of weird, look at this. And then we landed in a standard 4/4 section. That was one of the few moments where I could actually anticipate what the bars were like, how many bars were in a phrase, how long the phrase itself was. More often than not, we would have wild accent points where we would accent primarily 1 and 3, and then we would have a random beat 2 accent that would feel like maybe we lurched forward a bar, maybe we had an odd number previously, but then this kind of feels like it resolves in an odd number of beats. So if you add them together, do you get 16 or 24 or 32 standard multiples of beats that we would normally socket a number of bars into to create a phrase? I don't know, because that seemed to always change too. I never had a strong grasp on the phrasing of this track. Every time I thought I understood, okay, we're doing 4/4/4/3, I follow that up the next time and it's different. Or at least it feels different based on accent placement. And I was just never confident in saying, all right, here's the beginning. We're restarting this idea, because the 2 times I think I visually showcased that, I was totally off. There was still like 3 to 6 beats to go before we felt the reset. So I was barely lost in this track through a majority of it. And that's, I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but that's fairly uncommon for me. The metric side of things, I think, are one of the places I excel pretty well at regarding analysis and breaking down why songs feel the way they do and what they're doing. And the metric side of this track just completely threw me for a loop. Otherwise, though, we've kind of touched a little bit on the harmony, looking at individual instrumentation. The guitars, the bass, the vocals, they're kind of doing the same thing they've done this entire album. The drummer, yeah, like I said, more intense this time around, but still fairly consistent. Just, the backbeat, not the backbeat, the rhythmic backbone of this entire album. The drummer sat there from a more functional angle this entire time. They had their chance in the spotlight. Track 5 blew me away, but this is a return back to being that foundation that everything's built on. Lyrics. Was this album a journey of self-discovery? And if so, what did our protagonists discover? The first 2 tracks, if you've been on the journey with me, made sense to me, at least on a literal level. The next 3, I've tried my best to understand figuratively and to apply that in some sense to the literal read I had on the first 2. But I don't know that they necessarily learned who they are or what they are. At least I didn't pick up on that. Very clearly, I would say, is probably a skill issue on my part. If you have a stronger read of this, please let me know, because this final track is exceptionally clear in what it's saying, that this person is simply an outsider and that they know that. It says, born in the shade, I know what I am, and that cannot be rinsed away. When the strange tree that catches the eye among all others moves in a trance with almost no wind, there is some fatal grain that is undone, but I know what I am. It says, I sit on the periphery of things. I don't blend into everything else. I was born this way and I can't change that. The chorus then states, I know what the field mouse startled, split with his scythe, knew of his own blood in the tear to the bright edge. I don't know what this means. This completely eludes me. But the two verses, they're clear to me. It's an understanding and an acceptance of who you are now, and understanding that that has been who you were always destined to be, that you were born with this inside of you and there is no way to shed it. If this has to do with my understanding of the opening track, it's somebody who tried to find a simple life, wondered why it called to them, why it beckoned, and now they know this was always who they were. They may have tried to blend into society, but that was never who they were ever going to be. They find themselves more peacefully in nature by themselves, as the first track mentioned, something along the lines of smiling gleefully, knowing that no one will ever see me again. Now, how we got to this point, though, the journey that we went on, this almost surreal adventure from tracks 3 to 5, I don't know, dude, I'm completely lost there. But that's my reading on this, at least. Someone who leaves for a simple life, finds something through this journey in the forest, and accepts this realization of who they are. What any of this has to do with the music, I couldn't tell you. I'm also pretty sure he died in track 2, was it? Or 3? Whichever one, where the oligarch surrounded his tent, and the best read I had was that he was expelling casings and shells from his body. I don't know. That was where I began to get lost in all of this. I can't tie this final conclusion to everything in this track, but I think as far as me attempting to have some sort of thread from the first track to the last track, that's it. But this is where y'all come in. These are my thoughts on Yellow Eyes Immersion Trench Reverie. What did you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this? Let me know. Toss all of that and anything else you'd like to into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, is a link for Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. I'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC. We're going to do a live stream over on twitch.tv/criticalcomposer. Usually goes for about 2.5 hours. We chit chat, listen to some good music. It's good company, good tunes. If you can make it, I highly suggest you do. Otherwise, I'll always get that up as fast as possible if you want to watch it pre-recorded, not live. Pre-recorded always sounds weird, even though it's accurate. But anyways, post live. If you want to watch it post live, that makes sense, I guess. Otherwise, Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as always, we'll kick off next week's theme, which I'm pretty sure is strange music. A bit more of a subjective term, but a week that I think is going to be fun and, you know, probably challenging for me at least, but I'm looking forward to it. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.